Hello everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IS in English. My name is Bhavar Singh Surya, NCERT 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012, and I welcome you on the platform. Now in this session we'll be talking about emergency and governance, and that is we'll be talking about Article 352, even the constitutional safeguards and the structural balance of power that is there in the Indian democracy. And this topic is important for your GS paper 2, which deals with the polity and governance as well. Now, why are we discussing this topic? That is because when it comes to the newly revised National Curriculum Framework, so NCERT has released the new class 9th social science textbook that is titled Understanding Society, India and Beyond. And now this has introduced a dedicated section on the emergency that was that was applied, or the emergency powers were used between 1975 to 1977. Now it describes this period as one of the major challenges faced by the Indian democracy. At the same time, let me tell you that when it comes to this new textbook, so there is the preamble that had been dropped, and even the concepts like secularism and socialism, they had been dropped from the NCERT as well. Now we'll be talking about this complete framework in this session, but let me tell you that at GS at the StudyIQ IS, so we are offering you with the GS Foundation batch for the P2I, or the P2I batches, which are important for your preparation, and ultimately they lead to your the dream, that is to get into the IS examination. So over here, if you are preparing for 2027, 28 or 29, so you can join the GS Foundation batches on the platform of StudyIQ, which are based upon the SMART model, where you get the structured classes, you get the mentorship, assessment, revision and the test as well. And the morning batch will be starting from 27th of June. So do not wait and use the code BRS Live for the maximum discount that you will fetch on the platform of StudyIQ. Now when it comes to the time period of emergency, alright, that is between 1975 to 1977, that was not just about the clash of the constitutional articles, but it was also a mass battle on the ground that was led by socialist thinker J.P. Narayan, or Jayaprakash Narayan. Now over here what has happened was the students and the citizens in Bihar and Gujarat, they mobilized against the corruption, against the inflation and unemployment as well. Now he called for the total revolution, that is Sampurna Kranti, and that created an alternative center for the democratic legitimacy as well. And that also showcased that the sovereign power, it resides ultimately in the people. That is, we have the sovereignty, or the popular sovereignty as it is called. Now when it comes to the complete aftermath, so what had happened was that in 1977, after the revoke of the emergency, so there was the fresh mandate that was elected. And later on, it was seen that in 1977, the Congress, which has not lost the power in the center. So the complete power dynamics, they had changed in the center, where the Janata Party, it emerged as the victorious party in 1977 elections. Now over here, this deals with the paradox of the power. That is, can a democratic state temporarily destroy the fundamental civil liberties in order to preserve its own existence? And where does the security end and authoritarian or authoritarianism that begins? Now this was in the Constitutional Assembly debates that was there in 1948 about the emergency provision that had to be included. Now this is again very important because this question pertains to the balancing act, or the balancing nature that is there under Article 352, which actually tries to balance the national sovereignty and the territorial security against the fundamental liberties and even the federal autonomy that had been provided under the Constitution of India. Now let's understand the complete evolution of the emergency powers. Now when it comes to 1935, we know that the Government of India Act was passed in 1935 under the British Empire, and the section 102 of the Government of India Act 1935 that allowed the Governor General absolute power to declare the emergencies as well. Now in 1949, there was the assembly clash where it is the H.V. Kamath and the K.T. Shah, they warned against the fascist state that would be created under the part 18 of the Constitution that was incorporated. Now this part 18 is actually where we have the emergency powers which are there. Now in 1975, there was the authoritarian crisis where the proclamation was issued on the basis of internal disturbance by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at that point of time, and it was the advice of Prime Minister that was taken into consideration and the emergency was imposed. Now, in 1978, there was the Post-Crisis Shield. Ultimately, the 44th Amendment Act was passed in 1978, which had raised the barriers to ensure that emergency is impossible to abuse easily as well. Now, let's see about Article 352. Now, why does it exist? Basically, the intention for the Article 352 was to defend the sovereignty, unity and integrity of the country during the time of the extreme crisis. Now, the framers, they have modeled it upon the Germany's Weimar Republic constitution with the structural changes that aligns to India as well. Now, this was to safeguard the state from the self-destruction during the event of war or the external aggression. Now, the underlying assumption was that in a crisis, it is basically the survival of the nation state that overrides the normal democratic federal procedures which are guaranteed by the constitution. Now, over here, there were two different things. When it comes to the function, so there was the original form of the constitution that was before 1978. And according to this, the national emergency, it could be proclaimed on the grounds of war, external aggression, or even because of the internal disturbance. Now, this term, internal disturbance, was quite vague. And ultimately, over here, before 1978, there was just the oral notification that was required without the, cabinet approval. And also, the approval was by the simple majority within the 2 months. And even ultimately, when it came into the force, so the emergency was valid indefinitely till the time it had been revoked. Now, after the 44th Amendment Act of 1978, so now the term that was earlier the internal disturbance, that was removed and it was replaced by the armed rebellion. And ultimately, there is other safeguards that were included. That includes the written advice of the cabinet and even the 2/3 of the special majority approval by the parliament that has to be done within 1 month itself. Now, when it comes to 1975 event, so it was on 25th of June 1975 that the then President of India, Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, he had signed the decree based upon the recommendation of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's sole advice without consultation of the cabinet using the vague internal disturbance loophole. Now, this led to severe suspension of the Article 19 freedom which are provided and even the censorship of the press. And there were arrests of thousands of people that was done under the MISA Act that was there. That is Maintenance of Internal Security Act, and eventually the infamous submissive ADM Jabalpur verdict was passed by the Supreme Court as well. Now, what are the safeguards which are there, and we can compare the 42nd and the 44th Amendment Act as well. Now, over here, when it comes to 42nd Amendment Act, so it was before this, there were the war, aggression and the internal disturbance that were provided as the ground for the imposition of the national emergency. But in 1978, the 44th Amendment Act was passed, which actually replaced internal disturbance with the armed rebellion, and thereby it eliminated the vague pretext for crushing the dissent in the democracy. Now, there is also executive initiation where before the 44th Amendment Act, it was just the oral consultation of the Prime Minister that was sufficient. But later on, it was changed that the written advice of the entire cabinet is required for the proclamation of the national emergency. And this has stopped the single person concentration of the authority for declaration of the national emergency. Now, the approval before 44th Amendment was 2 months and from the date of proclamation. Now, this was changed from 44th Amendment Act to 1 month time period from the date of proclamation, and it had ensured that there is swift legislative oversight when it comes to the national emergency as well. Now, when it comes to the majority, so before it was the simple majority that was required, but right now there is special majority that is required for the proclamation of the national emergency. That is 2/3 of the present and voting, and that must be greater than 50% of the strength of the House. So there is requirement of broad multi-party consensus if there is a national emergency that have to be implied in India. Now, when it comes to the fundamental rights, you can see that ultimately this allowed, before 44th Amendment Act, it allowed the suspension of Articles 20 and 21. But there were safeguards that were included in the 44th Amendment Act where the Article 20 and 21, they can never be suspended during the time of emergency, and it guarantees the absolute right or the right of life that is provided under the fundamental rights that are there. Now, at the same time, we have certain checks and balances which you can see. The first thing is about judiciary, which holds the power of judicial review, which was restored by the Minerva Mills case in 1980. And ultimately, it evaluates if there is any malified intent behind the emergency declarations or not. Then we have Parliament, which is the immediate legislative check on the powers of the national emergency, where it should review or renew the emergency every 6 months using the special majority, and also the power had been provided to Lok Sabha that it can revoke the national emergency just by simple majority as well. And the president has the power under Article 74(1), where he can send the cabinet advice back again for the reconsideration once, acting as a crucial temporal check on the issue of the national emergency. Now, the impact was, after the emergency, there was, dramatic shift when it comes to the judiciary of India. Because the severe abuse of the power that was there in 1975, that had triggered a total structural, changes in the Supreme Court. Now, realizing that they had failed the citizen in ADM Jabalpur case in 1976. Now, what was this case about? Let me tell you. Now, in this case, what happened was that the Supreme Court said and laid down that during the period of emergency, the people, they cannot approach the courts for the habeas corpus writ jurisdiction. And ultimately, over here, they have realized that they have failed the citizen in ADM Jabalpur case. So, the judges, they expanded the scope of Article 21 to cover the due process of law. That was through the Menka Gandhi case in 1978. Also, this gave birth to the PIL, or the public interest litigation, to democratize the judicial access that we have seen in 1980s. The courts, they have transformed from being the traditional status quo defenders into the aggressive watchdogs of the civil rights. These are the important, the changes that you will see in the complete judicial process and the judicial reforms as well. Now, there are certain hidden dimensions of Article 352 that you must keep in mind. The first one is, it is about the federalism distortion. Although India is a federal state where we have clear demarcation of the powers of the center and the states, which is given under the Schedule 7, that actually provides with the different list where it lists out the powers of both the governments that are there. But ultimately, when we have the emergency that is imposed, so there is the unitary takeover, and that is why the complete federal structure of India is not completely federal, but it is quasi-federal in nature. So during the time of Active 352 proclamation, the central executive, they can order or they can issue the directives to any state or on any of the matter that is there. And the legislative power also shifts completely. The parliament, it can legislate over the items which are there in the state list. Now, let me check your knowledge. If the parliament has, enacted any act during the process of the national emergency that is there in the state list, so tell me, after the revoke of the national emergency or after the national emergency ceases to exist, so what happens to that state law? Just comment down in the comment section and let me know that what happens to such kind of law that is made by the parliament when it legislates over the state list during the time of national emergency. Now, over here, even if the state assemblies, they are not suspended as they are in Article 356 that provides for the president's rule. So, their democratic sovereignty is basically hollowed out completely under the centralized security canopy as well. Now, there is another dimension as well, that is the administrative overreach. Because what happens is, when civil rights are suspended, the administrative accountability to courts, it also drops to zero. The officers are basically insulated from the constitutional torts of action which had been taken during the emergency operation. And it leads to the creation of a committed bureaucracy and judiciary that actually answers to the political executive, which dictates rather than the constitution for which they must be accountable. Now, over here, it is not just that in India we have the emergency provisions. We can compare it with the other political setup as well. That is also what is required when you are studying polity, because now UPSC asks you to compare the political setups to the different global standards which are there. Now, when it comes to India, so we have Article 352 that lays down with the national emergency under Part 18 and requires parliamentary approval every 6 months through the 2/3 of the majority. Now, here you can see that it is strongly fortified by the 44th Amendment Act in 1978. Now, when it comes to the emergency provisions, we have taken it from the Germany's Weimar Constitution, and there is Article 115 that is not stand laws, and here the Federal Constitution Court has the full authority to review all the measures which had been taken in the Germany, and also it had directly been reformed from the Article 48 of that Weimar Constitution, through which the provision of emergency that we had taken. Now, in United States, there is National Emergency Act of 1976, where the Congress can terminate the emergency at any time by the joint resolution, and there is wide executive discretion that is there in USA. But at the same time, it is subjected to strict judicial review also. Now, there is the provision for the, in UK as well, that is Civil Contingencies Act that was passed in 2004. And over here, it had been provided that it must lay down the regulation before the Parliament for approval within 7 days. And the parliamentary sovereignty, it prevents any kind of permanent executive dominance that is there in the UK or United Kingdom. So these are the global emergency frameworks that you can see in the event of any of the emergencies that would be there. So that would be all in this session. I hope that this is clear to you why Article 352 had been in news, and also what is the national emergency and why this is important to study, and also the global framework when it comes to the different emergencies that are there in the global network or the political system that is there. So that would be all in this session, but do not forget to like the session, do share this with your friends, and even subscribe so that you do not miss any of the updates in the future. So that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Jai Hind. Please do take care of yourself. Thank you.